Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? I'll tell you what. At the very moment, though, things seem very peaceful in my immediate area. I'm surrounded by animals who are in various stages of shitty health, but who are living life to the fullest, especially if living life to the fullest means waking up Naomi and me at all hours of the night to play. And everything within arm's reach is at least pleasant. So that's, hey, we're living in a world where the radius of pleasantness is rapidly shrinking. So I guess I'm thankful for that. You know what else I'm thankful for? Today's episode, because today I'm talking to Bob Mould. If you don't know who Bob is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Malone, New York, musician Bob Mould attended college in St. Paul, Minnesota, where he formed Husker Du in 1979 with Grant Hart and Greg Norton. One of the most well-known bands of the hardcore punk era, Husker Du released 6 albums, mostly on SST and then on Warner Bros., before breaking up in 1988. After this, Bob began performing under his own name and then formed Sugar in 1992. While Sugar was only together for 3 short years, they released 2 albums, an EP, and a B-sides collection, and their first album, Copper Blue, was a big hit. Since Sugar's dissolution, Bob has kept quite busy, releasing over a dozen albums on labels like Anti and Merge, and his latest album, Here We Go Crazy, was just released on Granary Music /BMG Records, and folks, it's a delight. You can tell I had a stilted delivery there because as I'm recording this, my cat Squee is nosing, rubbing his face on the recorder and nudging it slowly towards the edge of the table it's on. And so I'm trying to read Bob's bio and keep an eye on that at the same time so he doesn't knock it off. And you know what? He should knock it off. Knock off his crappy little behavior, Squee. You hear that? Anyway, this was a wonderful episode. I recorded this towards the end of January, kind of right before the old governmental fascism really kicked into high gear. And I kind of feel like I have to note that stuff now, like when was this recorded, so you know when to place it in the downward spiral of the United States. If I had any knack for illustration, I would draw the "This is fine" dog in the burning building. But in this version, he would be being black-bagged and carried out of his chair by some brown shirts. Black-bagged by some brown shirts. It's a good title for something. Anyway, I've wanted to talk to Bob for a long time. I've loved his music since I discovered Husker Du in high school. And here's the thing. Bob wrote a memoir, and I don't like to make my guests, I try to do some research so that they're not answering the same questions they always answer in every interview. But with a memoir, a lot of the stuff I talk about on the show, well, that gets codified when you write your life story. So I wanted to make sure maybe we stuck to areas that Bob had not investigated yet. So, a lot of usual stuff on the show, existential artistic questions of identity and how those things form in your life. And I think we ended up having a pretty interesting conversation. It's funny, he started out, I think, somewhat formal, answering questions, I think maybe in a codified way. But then once he warmed up to me, we really got into it. So I hope you enjoy this. And stay tuned, coming up on the show, a lot of cool people, some people from the world of comics, like Daniel Warren Johnson and Anders Nilsson. Also, just talked to Tina Halliday from Sheer Mag, and that was so cool. I really love talking to her, so look forward to those. But for now, let's talk to Bob. You had politely said, "Oh yeah, I'm good," but how are you really? I guess is in this world we live in now.
Doing okay. I mean, the world of politics is pretty horrifying. It's a nice sunny day. As soon as we finish this podcast, I'll probably go outside and enjoy the sunshine and fresh air, which is pretty important to all mental health. I don't know. Work is good. People seem to be responding well to the new song. People in the industry seem to be responding well to the new album. Uh, Tickets are selling well. I'm doing lots of press. So I guess overall, pretty good.
Yeah. I found this to be, I've been describing this time as Lynchian in the sense that, and this is before he passed away, but in the sense that everything feels very bifurcated, in that you walk outside and it's very lovely outside of my house right here. And I
Hmm.
go in my house and my wife and my pets are there, and it's relatively nice. And then you kind of like take a step further than that and it's bedlam. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way, but I mean literally like the city I live in was on fire for a couple weeks and all this other
Yeah.
stuff. You know,
Yes.
so it's a very, I don't know if you know I just had David Cross on the show a little while ago, and you guys are about
Hmm.
the same age. And I asked him about the transition to Reagan, and I was like, did that feel as awful as this is feeling at the moment? And he was like, you didn't really, there was some petty stuff that happened. Like they took down the solar panels on the White House. But like
Right.
the real vicious stuff didn't come in for a little while later.
Hmm.
And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering, does all this feel kind of like, I've been through this before a little bit.
Similar, but not the same. So for your listeners who may not know that much about me, I'm 64 years old. I'm a gay man who came of age in the 1980s, pretty much right where you highlighted, with the beginning of 8 years of Reagan. I was attending a very liberal, small college in St. Paul, Minnesota, called named McAllister College. Very socially aware. Um, I wasn't out in the sense of being known publicly to be queer or gay or whatever. And the 80s were really difficult for me and for a lot of my friends, and a lot of those people are no longer with us. They left us too soon because of inaction by the government. So, fast forwarding up to now, David is a good friend of mine, and I understand what he's saying when he says, "Oh, this and that." Uh, the big difference is, to me, when you describe your life with your family inside your home being somewhat idyllic, and then you step away from that and it's bedlam. Uh, it's when you say step away, what I hear is when I look at my phone, and full acknowledgement of what you're saying about Los Angeles. I actually it's a terrible, terrible tragedy, terrible, terrible tragedy, and people will rebuild and people will be okay, but it will take time. I was on the Thursday of the fires, I was driving down the five and then took 210 east. So I was right in it,
Yeah.
just, I guess, a passing right through it, I should say, and seeing all the semis on the 210 that had tipped over and been towed off the road. Yeah, I mean, it was shocking, shocking, and just terrifying. And my art goes out to everybody. But I think this is a new situation that we're in with this government that's taking charge and just running amok on the world. It's a different time than the 80s. We communicate, mass media and communication was a one-way endeavor. uh, Now with the internet and social media and all of the different ways that we all can communicate or try to jump up on a soapbox with our personal thoughts, whether they are scientifically true or not, that's a completely different scenario than anywhere humanity has ever been before. So it's tough for me to quantify, events that are 20, 44 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
But it's similar. It may or may not end up worse, but it's not the same. It's that thing like history rhymes. It's like that, I guess.
I mean, did you feel as much absolute rage as I feel towards the political situation, or were you more repressed then, or were you able? I mean, you were in a band, so were you able to just kind of get those emotions out musically, and so it wasn't as it didn't sit in your heart as it's been sitting in mine lately?
And so in the 1980s with Husker Du, it was
Yeah.
a band that started. It was a band that started in 1979 in St. Paul, Minnesota. Uh, Husker Du was a band that myself, Grant Hart, Greg Norton, the three of us living in Minnesota, 6 months of winter every year. You find a lot of indoor activities to do. We all met through music. We all loved music. We all played instruments and decided to start a band. We were all fans of, the first wave of punk rock, both American and British. And, we also liked free jazz and we also liked psychedelic music and we, liked a lot of things. So, as most young bands do, we started writing songs not as tributes to our heroes, but definitely influenced by the music we loved. And for a couple years, the band was, I guess not nondescript, but, one of hundreds of thousands of bands around the country that were doing, just doing what you do. You write songs, you play shows, and your friends come, and maybe they tell more friends or they bring friends, and the thing starts to pick up. I think Husker Du was a very politically aware band, both locally and nationally, as well as globally. Maybe not as overtly political as other bands like Crass or Discharge or bands who really drilled into politics with their lyrics. We did a little bit of that, and then we realized that we were more suited to talk about personal situations, relationships, feelings, you know, sort of partly biographical versions of our collective lives. So, that's what the music was about. The act of doing the music, in derelict situations, clubs that are held together with duct tape and chewing gum, you know, sleeping on people's floors, going to get food stamps when you're on tour, stuff like that. Just trying to set a stage or, describe an environment for people to, when you have nothing to lose because you have nothing, I personally was eager to build things, to build community, to help other musicians, to get better at my craft, to tell stories. So, I think you started with, not vitriol, but just the anger of how one puts anger or frustration into their work. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
It's you don't. I didn't have to make a conscious effort.
Yeah. I mean, okay, there's a lot there. I'm curious, you said that like you had all these goals, or you said that there were all these things you were doing with the music that storytelling. And
Mhm.
I'm curious, were those conscious things that you thought at the time, or or is that, because you've written a memoir, right? And so obviously you've had to go back and kind of narrativize your life in a certain way in
Mhm.
order to fit it into a book. Are these things that you have put onto yourself from the future that you have gone, whatever you've thought about it as you were writing, you've thought about it through therapy or through talking with friends or whatever, where you have now said, oh, well, that's what I was doing. But at the time, were those conscious things, or were you just kind of like doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's the early days, and ideally later today, if I choose to write some music, would be terribly unconscious.
Hmm.
It's sometimes when people try to say what makes it go, what makes it where the secret to it is not thinking about it. First off, it's
Yeah.
the I have some of my basic guidelines for songwriting or any or writing a book or scoring an art or an opera or anything that you do with a creative endeavor. It's you hope to put yourself in a protected environment for the moments where you try to let yourself go. And so, an example, people always come up and go, "What, I'm a songwriter and I just get stuck. And what should I do? How do you do this?" And I'm like, Just do it. Just
Right. Yeah.
catch, just do it. Just catch the rainwater as it's falling and figure out what you're going to do with the bucket of water later. And in practical terms, that's just do it, do it, do it. Don't edit yourself as you go, because that is a completely separate process from expression.
Yeah.
Editing is the refinement of expression. And I don't think, for me, trying to do both at once is counterproductive. It's counterintuitive. I think the best way to get with yourself and express yourself is to be unconscious in it. Once you've done all that writing or all that singing or humming or whatever, however you get those things expressed and captured, after the capture, then you can do all the editing you want. And
Yeah.
that's the time when you look at it. That's the time you look at it and go, what was I thinking? Oh, there's the keyhole. Do I have a key for that door? Can I get that door open now? Oh, the door's open now, but the door is many feet too high or low from where I want to go. So how do you? It's all that kind of stuff. And so that's how I, when you ask about expression in younger days with music, it's winter, it's boredom, it's alcohol,
Right.
it's friendships, it's community, it's all, and it's just all the things that happen to you all day and night. It's selling blood. It's being dependent on the generosity of others. It's all of those kinds of factors. Those are things, maybe decades later, I can look back and go, oh, yeah, it's because I was just doing because I had to do. Because this is what I did. This is what I was doing.
How easy was it for you to kind of unconsciously? I'm just saying this as someone who has never, not never. I have a very difficult time just being in the moment and just do. I think it's sometimes easy when I'm writing. If I'm working on a script or something like that, I can kind of slip into it every once in a while. But for most
Mhm.
other things, I'm always kind of watching myself from the outside, like being like, what are you doing? And so
Mhm.
there's always the like a little critical super ego just standing there being like, get a load of this guy. What does he think he's doing? And I'm curious, like when you were younger, at the very least, are you able to just kind of like slip into that, or were you always like that, or like how did it function with you?
Well, I'll go back to the beginning of my memories of music and expression. Was coming across. I might have been 3 years old. an album, a 12-inch vinyl album. It was the soundtrack to Around the World in 80 Days. And I don't know much about the music, but the artwork fascinated me. It was just like people in hot air balloons
Yeah.
going somewhere. So these ideas of travel and adventure, and this big piece of cardboard that held this big piece of polyvinyl chloride. And the next things that I remember about music was probably a year or two later, 4 or 5 years old. My grandmother used to take care of me for periods of time. And this is my father's mother.
Okay.
And she, her job or her profession or what she did during her days, I guess, was she took care of a woman who I think had been struck by lightning. So was unable to care for herself, but was obviously alive. So my grandmother would, bathe her and care for her during the day. And I would go along with my grandmother and I would set myself up at a piano that was in this house. And I would have an AM radio. And I would turn on the radio and I would hear pop music. And I would sit at the piano, and for some unknown reason, I was able to figure out music theory from that.
Hmm.
And then moving up a few more years, parents, my dad had worked for the post office, and my mom was an overnight telephone operator. And my dad was a musician. He played sax when he was in the military, but he never played sax around me, but the saxophone was there. My mother had no discernible music skills or knowledge. But anyways, my parents decided to buy a mom and pop grocery store, sort of like the old television show Dobie Gillis,
Yes. With
where
Maynard
where
G.
the grocery
Krebs.
where the gro- yes, it's Maynard G. Krebs with the grocery. Well, so I grew up in this house that also had a grocery store attached to it. So we all, as children, learned how to run the register and use those weird saw-like machines to slice bologna for people, like
Oh,
as a
yeah.
as a as a kid. So I'm surprised I have any fingers left. But anyhow, so to music, because my dad would buy alcohol and tobacco from vending companies. It was a small town of 5,000 people. So a lot of the vending companies that were in town also would stock the jukeboxes in town at restaurants or truck stops or whatever. And when they pulled off singles to make way for new singles, my dad would buy the used singles for a penny a piece. And those became my toys as a kid.
Okay.
So that was where it all started to, then that was the aha. That was oh, there's so much to learn here. There's so much to emulate here. That's when I started writing songs. I think first song I wrote I was 9. And yeah, so that's like a crazy route to get to writing music on a plastic chord organ, and then eventually picking up guitar and teaching myself how to play, and then eventually ending up in my first real band, Who's Kadu, in 1979. So it's quite a
Yeah. But
interesting route.
there's no you outside yours. There's like what I was saying, like the super ego. There's no like you're just kind of like able to be in the moment as you're doing this stuff and you're not judging yourself. Or is that something you have to learn later?
I only became aware of that part, the superego part, after people tell you or told me how great my work was.
Okay.
That kind of what you described, the idea of the superego saying, "Who do you think you are?" Um, I only became aware of that once people told me who I was or who they
Uh-huh.
thought I was.
So I guess,
Uh,
yeah, that's what I'm trying to find out. Like, are you self-defining, or are you learning who you are in relation to how other people see you? Does that make sense?
I only became aware of that the idea of self criticism in my work once other people put critical acclaim on the work. So to me it was pretty easy until I knew people were looking.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you take compliments well? And I'm this is saying I have a problem with when someone compliments me. I don't know what to do with that energy.
I'm always thankful for it. I yeah, I can take a compliment.
Okay.
It's not a at the risk of sounding bigger than life, I get complimented a lot on my work, and I'm
Sure.
always appreciative of it. So,
You've been making
um,
good music for decades, so yes, of course.
yeah, thanks. No, but I mean, I think in my position, I hear, and all of it is heartfelt. I never think that people are just saying it because people will compliment me in ways that I know it's very genuine and very heartfelt. When people come up, for instance, like if I do the last 3 years, I've been out doing a lot of solo electric touring where it's just me and electric guitar. And, I show up in town in a rental car with my gear and my merch, and I do my sound check, and then I count my merch in, and somebody sells it for me, and then I do my show. And after I pack up my gear and get out of my wet clothes, I go out to the merch table and I count the money and I thank the person who sold the stuff. And then there's 30 or 40 people waiting to get things autographed or just to say hello or these days to do a selfie. And invariably, a person will come up and just say, "I want to thank you for tonight's show. I want to thank you for all the work you've done. I first heard about you," and that's the key, is they show me at what point in their life my work showed up on their radar.
Mm.
And they typically frame it in, I was going through a bad time, or I had just met my wife who's standing right here next to me, or it's highly personalized compliments. So I mean, people come with their story.
Yeah,
So
but that's what I'm talking about. I guess that's the energy that I have because, like, when someone is complimenting you, they're being vulnerable, and then they're
Mhm.
talking about, they're like, if someone comments like whatever a podcast I've done, or I do one with my wife that people like a lot too, and that vulnerability I have trouble
Mhm.
processing, but you seem to not have trouble processing the vulnerability. I guess that's the thing I'm getting at.
Other people sharing their life story like that, like complete strangers, and we have this invisible bond that until then I wasn't cognizant of, and they continue on with more personal information and spiritual reckonings and all of that. How could no? That's, I mean, what a gift! What a great time! What a great time of the day!
It is a wonderful gift. At the same time, I am not mentally healthy enough, even though I've been through therapy for over a decade now, to be able to deal with it. Which is why I'm using myself as this kind of like mirror to figure you out, because I'm like, okay, so
Oh,
you are healthy enough that you can, like, someone can be vulnerable in front of you, and it's not like, it is not like, oh no, in your heart.
no, it's usually my job. It's my job to listen, and it's my job to make sure they don't fall apart
Uh huh. Uh huh.
and that they get home safe.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to go back though to there's a lot. I've started writing things down because there's a lot. You'll like
Mhm.
say something and I'm like, I don't want to interrupt you, and then I'm like, wait, I want to know more about this. Your
Right.
grandmother cared for a woman who had been hit by lightning. Was she badly burned? Were you there in a house with a woman who
Yes.
was
Yeah. I mean, she was generally sort of frozen in position.
how did as a small you said like you were 3, right? How did you even comprehend what was going on? That seems horrifying.
I I didn't. I was just told that was so.
Uh-huh.
So when I tell you that is what I saw, that is because I was told that is so. So I wasn't like, oh gosh, I was. It wasn't like I was taking it apart. Like, oh, if she just hadn't been standing in that big puddle out front, or what, it just, it was what I was told, and it was so. So that was what I worked with.
Was she burned? Like, did you see her? I'm just trying to imagine, like, in my mind's eye, I'm trying to figure this out. Like, how is a
I didn't
3 year
spend.
old?
I didn't spend a lot of time. I didn't spend a
Uh,
lot of time gawking. I saw the woman was in another part of the house, and I was positioned at a piano in a den or a living room. So
yeah.
it wasn't as if I was, rinsing out, washcloths or something and handing them back to my
Right,
grandmother.
right. I'm just because there is something interesting that you use this as the kind of like start of the narrative of like how music became interesting to you, and I do think there's something interesting there, even though I don't know exactly what in the connection between the two. But
It's
maybe
yeah, it's an odd component of. I mean, had I not said that, it would be, oh, I spent time with my grandmother and I put a radio on the piano and played along.
right,
So yeah,
right,
it's it's that little bit, it's that little extra bit of color that
yeah.
I get.
The other thing I was trying to think through your history last night. I was thinking about your dad and like because I'm like the timeline doesn't work. You said he was in the military, but he would not have been in World War II, right? That he would have been too young at that point.
Let me see. He was born in 20. He would have been 19 at the end of the war. So
I mean, the like, what did he do in the military?
was Lackland Air Force Base. He didn't. I don't think he was in the military for very long. Didn't really talk about it a whole lot, but he did mention that he played saxophone and had a saxophone in the house, but he never picked it up.
Hmm. I wonder if that's significant. I don't know.
I would think so. I would think so. Yeah. I would think if one was a musician and a child says, play something for me, that you would at least give it a go. But my dad did not. So I guess he divorced himself perhaps from that part of his life. So that's all I can figure.
Because I was reading a lot, and you keep describing as a complicated person, and
Mm.
I'm wondering where do you think the complicated part comes from?
And my father,
Yeah.
well, I would, my parents lost their eldest child as I was born, which to me would be sort of a traumatic thing if I were a parent
Oh
and
yeah.
lost a
Obviously.
child.
Yeah.
And, I think that probably had a lot to do with the dynamics of my father, my mother, all us kids, how everything fit together. My father was, probably coping or not coping with a lot of emotions. And again, the early, 1960, not this was not 1960 was not an age of enlightenment, amongst men or
Yeah.
families. The dynamics were completely different than they are now. So that kind of trauma is probably hard to shake. And I think with most people, unchecked trauma leads to possibly bad behavior, you know
Yeah. Of course.
substance abuse, violence, things like that. So I think that's about the best I can come up with.
I mean, how much did you know? Like, you were born into a sub, I would say, tragic situation, I suppose. How much of
Hmm.
that did you know when you were younger and growing up?
Not that much. I mean, not enough to Not enough to say that I knew what was happening, but you can sense that things aren't right, but you don't, I don't think me at 8 months or me at 18 months would have the capacity to go, oh, it's because of this. And this led to that, and that leads to this. That's impossible at that age, but in definable terms. But I'm sure that there was, an aura or a presence or you know, just part
Yeah.
of part of the whole deal. Sort of undefinable as an infant, but probably recognizable as a being.
Yeah. I like the way you put that, though, specifically the word aura, because it really, I've talked to a lot of people on the show where there is just something tragic that has happened before they formed as a person, before they existed, or like right before there, and they're just thrown into this situation, and there's just a big question mark, and they grow up with this big question mark that's just kind of there, or like you
Hmm.
said, an aura that's there, and it's just very confusing. And I'm wondering if that was the same kind of situation for you, where you're like, there's something off here. I just don't know what it is, and I just have to react to the situation the way it
You
is.
just grow it. You grow with it. You grow up with it. It's to parse the psychology of a parent as you're growing up, not so easy to do. Decades away from it, yeah, of course you can look back and go, oh well, that caused this, which led to that. But uh, you know I think you grow up in the house that you're born into, right?
Sure.
The things, the behavior that seems strange or bizarre as you get older, as you sort of 8 to 10 to 12 to whatever, when you really start to, you see how other families around you operate, and you go, oh, this what I that seems strange because that's nothing like what I'm growing up in. Not knowing that what one grows up in is even more abnormal. So it's that kind of thing where I remember as a kid, there was the neighbors that I spent the most time with, had a similar family structure, sort of a drinking dad, and all the stuff that whatever manifestations come from that, abuse, violence, unpredictability, all that kind of stuff. When for me growing up in it, it's just like, oh well, this is what it is, this is what I've got. So again, decades later, you know when I take the time to think about it, or even decades later from that, when I still think about it maybe more in the sense of how we all we're all a product of our families. And for me, sometimes I feel, well, that's my dad.
Hmm.
Stop that. That's
Yeah.
that's the part of your dad you don't want to be, just because you spent 17 years witnessing it doesn't mean you have to replicate it.
I mean, does that make you seek out contexts of unpredictability, or does it make you like look for more stable situations?
I prefer things to be rather stable. I don't have to, in my life. I don't have to go looking for unpredictability. It knows where I live.
Because like I think it's interesting though that you then later, in your teen years and your early 20s, you're in a band, which seems to be a very unpredictable situation itself.
Absolutely. Again, dependent on the generosity of others. There's nothing quite like leaving the country with a sleeping bag, and just a handful of phone numbers and about $8,
Yeah.
and it's just wondering where you're going to land, when it's going to end, or if you're ever going to get back to the basement where you left your stuff, because you don't. have a place to live. So yeah, I mean, these days at 64, I prefer things to be somewhat stable.
Sure. Sure. But like then were you like, yes, this feels good. I don't know what's going to happen and it feels there's something about it that feels right, or were you just like, well, I want to be in a band and this is what I have to do. So I'm go even though it doesn't feel good, I'm predicting it doesn't feel good, I'm going to do it anyway.
It always felt fine. It was what I was doing with my life. It was what I wanted to do with my life. It was momentum. It was movement. Occasional validation. Uh, you know, pretty pretty liberal amounts of disdain.
Mhm.
From society. It's an outsider's life. Nomadic life is not for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're young, you're resilient, and you don't really need sleep, and you don't really need to eat eat 3 meals a day, and you need to drink more than you eat. Drinking alcohol or taking drugs or socializing till 5 a.m. every day. I mean, that's all pretty unpredictable stuff. We all get into situations, and you get smart about you can see situations coming, and that's the wisdom that you pick up from nomadic existence.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, I was reading, you said your dad worked for the post office. I also read that
Hmm.
he was a TV repairman at one point.
Yes, he was the best in town.
In this again small, very like 5,000 person town in like the north part of New York, right? Like
Yep.
I'm trying to figure out, if things are somewhat unstable at home, are things unstable economically too? Is he like going from job to job? What was the and also in addition, what was the impetus to open a grocery store?
Self-employment, and there's the answer.
Mm,
Apparently, my mom was okay being a telephone operator at night. My dad was not okay with anything. Maybe I think when he was doing the TVs, he seemed happy. The post office, maybe not so much. So when an opportunity to be the master of his own destiny, he chose that. And that part of my dad, I certainly carry
hmm
in myself.
Did that provide some kind of like economic stability then?
No, not really. I
Okay.
mean, it was a roof over the collective head. There wasn't a whole lot of money. Again, I was fortunate when I got accepted at McAllister College. I qualified for the underprivileged scholarship spot. So growing up in poverty was what got me, and I guess my smarts or my good SAT scores got me into a wonderful college
Yeah.
where I only had to pay a couple $100 a year. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of money.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to figure out, how do your wants and desires form in this? Because I'm also going back to this thought about this kind of aura that's there and whether you
Well,
internalize that confusion or whether you kind of like let it sit outside and just
I just wanted
push
to get, I
against
just
it.
wanted to move on. There was nothing I could do to change the chaos.
Hmm.
So best to just move on, which
Did you
was,
try or want to?
of course, yeah. Who wants chaos? You try to stop it, but it doesn't stop. So then you're like, okay, I gotta go.
Uh huh. How did the desires form though? Like, what did you have any other thing you wanted to do with your life besides make music, or was it always this from that early age?
The music was always there. Once I learned guitar and started writing songs on guitar, and then eventually going to college and starting a band within months of being at college, that became, once Husker Du started, that was it. I mean, I stayed in school for another 2.5, 3 years. Did I want to do anything else? When I went to McAllister, when I got accepted, I was like, thank God I got a way out of this I got a way out of this house I grew up in. I can go do things. When I got there, there's that part for anyone who's been to college or university. If you don't have a singular track in mind, you sort of they look at they look at your scores, they do a little profile, and they make a few suggestions, and you do some classes, and you sort of end up in a direction, which for me, after a few months, became this idea that I would spend 3 years at McAllister and then do 2 years at Washington University in St. Louis. And I would end up with a master's in engineering. And then I would go on, it was numbers, it was math, that kind of stuff.
Huh.
Much like the small hometown queen, and I guess, to bring up an old weird phrase, who may have been the best cheerleader in the small town, and they go to the big city, and then all of a sudden they are like, oh my god, I had no idea there was like tens of thousands of people doing this, and they all do it better than me. I better get on this. That was my experience at McAllister with my engineering path. I was like, what the hell? So, and that coincided with starting a band. So, given
Uh-huh.
given the choice of, well, I'm certainly in over my head over here where I thought I was smart, compared to, I got a couple new friends, and we're bonding, and we're creating something. That was a pretty easy choice. Again, I sort of made that choice, but stayed at McAllister because of my scholarship. It gave me shelter, it gave me food, it gave me education, it gave me, I learned so much being there. And it was stuff that I didn't learn in books. It was just learning about life and culture, and diversity, and the differences that we all have, and how to try to bridge those differences.
Yeah. So
That was the education that I ended up getting from McAllister. I wish I could say that I was a great student, because I certainly was not.
was there any enjoyment of engineering, or was it really just I need a way out of this chaos and this is the best way?
I got the scholarship, and I figured it out once I got there. They did a little bit of profiling, said, you're good with numbers, put you over here. I went over there. I was so outclassed. That was the journey. And that all happened within, a year, I would say.
Yeah. So before that though, there was no there was no thing that you wanted to do or wanted to be, or was there something and you couldn't even say it to yourself? Like what was going on when you were still at home before you even went away to college?
Well, I was playing guitar and writing songs and being with friends, and wanting to be in a band, but the practicality of it in a small farm town in northern New York State, not so good, that not so probable that that would be successful. So again, with getting a way out,
Yeah.
that's all I was concerned with, was I'll figure it out once I'm out and I get there. So that was, yeah, always thought it'd be great to be in a band, to be, emulate bands, make music and all that. But knowing that I couldn't do that where I grew up, or that it wouldn't yield much, then getting, a ticket out, that was that's when it became, yes, I'll bring my guitar, I'll bring my amp, I'll bring my stereo, I'll bring my records, and I'll bring some clothes. And that's how I present myself. So,
Because I found it, we were pretty middle class, but we were middle class in the sense that I had food and I had clothes, but
mhm.
there was no safety net. I mean, I guess I could have moved back in with my parents if I needed to, but there was no I couldn't just go find myself. There was no year abroad and on my parents' dime or anything like that, or I could just sit back and kind of figure things out. So it took me a long time to figure out what I really wanted to do, into my late
Where did
20s.
you did you grow up in one place, or did you move around as a kid?
No, one place, Reading, Pennsylvania, which is
Reading, Pennsylvania. I know
yeah,
Reading. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What did your parents do?
My dad was unspecified businessman, where I did
Yep.
not exactly know what he did.
I hear you.
My mom was an English teacher, and
Oh,
they were
cool.
those things. My mom was an English teacher until she retired, until she took early retirement. She worked at a inner city school, and at some point was just like, this is not, I can't do this. Like, no one can.
In the glory days of public education.
Yeah, she's not going to dangerous minds it and turn their seat around and be like, you know what, Shakespeare's like rap, everyone, and so everyone then is doing King
Yeah.
Lear.
That's like when I tell people Catholic Mass is like writing a set list.
But like that's the thing that I think is interesting when I talk to people who are like, well, yeah, I want to do this, and then it took me 4 months into college to do it, whereas I was like terrified of losing my scholarship because then I'm like, I don't know what to do, and then I went to grad school and I was terrified of what what I really want to do was do what I'm doing now, writing and
Hmm.
performing and I mean podcasting didn't exist, but
Hmm.
and just did not see how that there was a path forward with that because I was terrified of what would happen. And I'm kind of curious how where was this just like, I have to do this, and if I don't, I don't know what else to do. Was it, I'm just curious, like, where did you, 4 months into college, you're like, well, I'm doing this. I'm in a band and this is it. And this is what I want to do, as opposed to,
Hmm.
I just sat terrified.
Oh, maybe I was lucky that I found my calling so quickly because it was a calling card that I had already. I just didn't know. Had I been excellent at engineering, at math and all the stuff that they felt was the way I should go, maybe music would have fallen by the wayside.
Hmm.
Who knows? I mean, at that age, it's really hard to tell. But when, starting a band and having that form of expression and having that camaraderie and feeling like that was, that's that's who I was becoming. That's, well, I guess what I wanted to be, before they said math, you know. I taught myself how to play guitar. I'd been writing songs for since I was 9. So yeah, I mean that was right there. That was a calling card. But when it became my calling, well, it's you just sort of feel it, right?
Yeah.
You feel like you end up in the place that you belong, and at that point, that that community and that expression and that camaraderie outweighed an academic path, and so it's like all those other things are what are keeping me alive, but there's this school thing over here that I have to do, and because I signed on for it and because they've afforded me this room and board and education, I need to also do this as best I can. So once I moved away from engineering and found a sociology professor that allowed me to create my own major
Mm.
that encompassed more of the social sciences, more of the humanities, and less of the numbers. Once I came up with, what about something like urban studies? Because I'm really good at cartography and I'm really good with statistics, and I'm taking these political science classes, and I'm a musician, and I think what I'm doing I'm part of a subculture. And then to have lucky enough to have an advisor who said, "Here, read this book and tell me what you think." And then I read this book written by a fellow named Howard Becker, and the book was called Outsiders, and it was his book about the subculture of jazz musicians.
Hmm.
When I read that, I'm like, this is what I'm doing, except it's not jazz. so then I had a framework. So then, the subsequent 2.5 years of school was pretty exciting because then I could just do what I was doing and that could become my thesis.
Uh-huh. When you were growing up, how much self-knowledge do you think you had?
What do you mean?
Like about yourself, about, either wants and desires, if we want to make this existential, about your personality, about who you are, like how much of that were you aware of when you were growing up, and how much of it was just kind of like unamalgamated amorphous stuff in your chest?
Just I can't even I don't know how to answer that. I'm trying to think of what I could give you that would be useful.
There's no
I don't know.
useful, there's no, I'm just curious about, like, because I asked that because this stuff was all kind of just junk in my chest, and I was kind of just reacting to things and following a path that I thought I was supposed to follow, as opposed
Yeah.
to like sitting and thinking about what do I want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wasn't. I mean, my number one, I guess my list at the time would have been, I love music, and I need to get away from this house I grew up in.
Uh-huh.
So, that, I mean, is that, determination or self-determination or, self-awareness or whatever. No, that was just sort of like, it was pretty basic. I love music. I'm a pretty smart kid. I think I can make it somewhere doing something, but I got to get out of here. As far as understanding, stuff. I don't know. Like when I was called, when I was called upon in elementary school to tutor kids who were having trouble with stuff. That was a little bit of why am I being the teacher now? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm 10. Yeah, of course I'll help. I'll try to help teach these kids math or English or whatever. But I mean, I remember that being sort of like, why am I the teacher now? Like
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be. I'm just a kid. So in a way,
But like the smart kid was your identity?
um, yeah, I guess. I mean, they tried to push me ahead 2 grades right away, and my parents said no. So I mean, I guess they wanted to. I guess they thought I could be accelerated, but I'm thankful that my parents did not do that. I've seen, I mean, kids who get pushed ahead, it's a different thing. I think, it's just a different thing. It's a different cadence to one's life. If you get pushed ahead really fast, really soon, like
Mm-hmm.
you miss it, then you got to get serious right away, right? Then
Right.
that's sort of like when you asked me about my work in the unconscious state, and only when music critics heaping the praise on did I become aware of what I was doing. It's sort of, life is like that, right? It's good to just do things with a framework, but you I think when others, whether it's giving a compliment or whatever kinds of validation, like when you start to get it and you accept and you look at it and you see that it's real, and then that's the stuff that gets you to the next place. I think I'm just making stuff up at 11:58 in the morning Pacific time. I'm
Sure.
not
No,
not
no.
not quite sure of anything. Just sort of
Of course.
go forward.
Look, I'm not holding you to anything. I think I'm just trying to figure out, at what point do you think you made a conscious existential decision about either like this is who I am as a person, or this is what I am doing, and this is what I want to be doing with my life.
Well, I mean, music is the through line.
Right.
It's for me when with the autobiography, for instance, how you said something about how one chooses to look at their past or tell their story. For me, it was finding you know a series of threads that ran parallel and intersected throughout my entire life. Whether it's family or addiction or homosexuality or music or travel, just like, or, all the, when I was putting my story together, I really didn't like the idea of looking back because I was never a guy that looked in the rearview mirror. I was always looking forward. So when the task was to tell my story, fortunately, my editor, Michael Azarat, who worked alongside me on the book, sort of pointed out this idea. Find some, what are the threads? What are the what are the through lines in your life, and how did they intersect, and how did they inform each other? And that is the way that I tried to tell my story, or show my story, I guess, because show don't tell. But um, it's yeah, it's still I'd like ideally it's a work in progress, right? We never get to actually realize everything that we are. It'd be like,
Yeah.
oh well, there it is, end of game.
Yeah. It's all striving, which I'm okay
Yeah,
with. We're striving for something, Why
gotta
why
keep moving, gotta move forward.
I mean, this show is all tell and zero show, so I'm on the other side of that.
No, it's good. No, this is a good conversation, but man, it's like it's we all have to grow up as much as it pains us. You know, it's just
Yeah.
it's like over time we gotta learn, and we have to achieve, and we have to provide, and we have to sustain and do all the all of these things that are just part of the game. But
Yeah.
the part when you ask about when did you know, or when did you we get glimpses, we get notions, we get passions, and then you just got to keep moving all the stuff forward together. You don't want to glory in anything for too long. You don't want to. For me, it's don't stay stationary too long. Keep moving.
Yeah.
Keep pushing a little bit. It's good to I know my strong suits in life. I build on those. But I think we should all try to keep our lives moving in interesting ways. Try
Hmm.
it's hard. I will say the older I get, the more I get set in my ways. The more we talked about
Yeah.
this idea. Do you like stability or unpredictability? I think I joked on chaos knows where I live. It's but yeah, as you get older, you sort of want I don't know if it's comfort, but you want constancy. I think, but
Yes.
still keeping the wanderlust, or the willingness to try things. The brain. I think the brain stays healthy through failure. So
Yeah. Okay. One last question then. Because you
sure.
said you weren't out at the time. You also said like there was this aura from your childhood of just like
Hmm.
I'm calling it confusion, but there was this stuff that was like,
Hmm.
why is this happening? When you start to when you come out, when you start to figure out some of the childhood things, does that change the way you approach writing music?
No, I still try to go for the unconscious state.
Uh-huh.
Uh, having said that, again, to go back to when people start being critical of your work, positive or negative, and and a tension starts to build up. That's you become self-conscious, right?
Mm,
And then you're like, oh, people are looking at me. People are looking at my work. People are critiquing. People are projecting onto my work. People are misinterpreting my work. And then you, that's an interesting struggle, but and where all of us finally get to that point of like, I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. This is what I do, and you don't have to pay attention. But it's
yeah.
in terms of like sexuality and stuff. I was active in my teen years, so I there was no question about my homosexuality. Again, in the mid 70s, now let's introduce a word, gay. That I did not understand. Having sex with other males, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Being gay, didn't really know what that was. Had an
Ah.
idea, had a few stereotypes here and there. So that, getting that identity squared up took a lot longer than it should have. And, when I look back, it's because I was a musician who happened to be gay. And there's a distinction in my mind between that, being a musician who's gay compared to a gay musician. And when I think about gay musicians, especially in 70s and 80s, it's people who strongly identified and created their work out of their sexual identity
Mm-hmm.
or around their sexual identity. I think of people like Jimmy Somerville. I think of people like Tom Robinson or Frankie Goes to Hollywood, or people who were, where it was either a political statement or a fashion statement or a lifestyle statement. And to me, for many years, the first 15 years maybe of my public music career, I did not define myself as a gay musician. And I still just sort of like, man, I'm a musician. It's like I tell stories. Yes, I'm gay,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't an important part of the work. And it's funny. There's this band called Buzzcocks,
Yeah.
and they were the first wave British punk band. And Pete Shelley, the principal songwriter, uh, I don't know if he was gay or bisexual, but I loved the Buzzcocks. And when I was able to decipher why the work meant so much to me, it was because Pete wrote gender neutral songs about love and about relationships and about life. And I saw that. And when Pete or myself or anybody writes from a world perspective, where you're not saying this is a song about specifically gay love. And those can be great songs, but to me, when you write with inclusion where anybody can be part of the song,
Mm-hmm.
it's a more effective song. It might not carry the gravity or weight of gay rights or what, that kind of stuff, coming at it from the more political side, but 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 I learned that lesson and applied it to my own work. So again, it was like, yeah, Bob's gay. It's an open secret. He doesn't want to come out and be all, politically protesty, whatever. That was, you know, I look back. I wish I, sometimes I wish I'd gotten myself out professionally sooner. Maybe I could have done more good, specifically in the late '80s. But
Hmm.
you know, sometimes it takes a while, right? But then
Yeah, of
once
course.
once you once you once you get comfortable with it, then you know, decades removed from that sort of public professional outing of myself, 30 years later, I'm still like, yeah, I guess I think I can speak on that part of my life a little more clearly now. I know I always hesitate the idea where people say you're a role model or you the it's, no no, I just do my thing, and if I let me tell my story and maybe you'll see something in it, as
Yeah.
opposed to really being really emphatic. No, this is my cause,
Yeah.
and that's not really me.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting though that your creative process or like how you approach writing music, it's always been connected to it's always been connected in a way that maybe you weren't personally. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm maybe I'm
The writing is unconscious, but the content is always personal,
mm,
typically autobiographical, typically observational of people close to me or around me.
mm-hmm.
I'm not a writer that, it's not my style to fabricate from, other people's cloth.
Right.
It's usually places I've been or things I've experienced. I'm not I have a lot of jealousy towards, not jealousy, but I envy the song. I envy the songwriter who can just conjure a time and place and setting that bears no resemblance to anything they've ever done.
There was some Death Cab for Cutie song. I remember there was
You
Ben
got it.
Gibbard where I realized that he was writing a character, that he had made up a character and it wasn't him. And it really kind of like made me feel disconcerted a bit. And I can like pick out songs from different songwriters where I'm like, oh, that is about you. I guess this isn't. But like
Yeah.
when it does flow from the person, I do feel much more connected to the work in a deeper way.
If that personal voice connects with your experience, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Ben Gibbard is a dear friend of mine, and he's one of the most gifted songwriters for exactly that characteristic of being, just he's able to set the stage so quickly in a song,
Yeah.
whether it's personal or observational or fictional. I don't sit down and Ben and go, hey, that line, like, is that for real, or is that real imagined, or somewhere in the middle? Like, we just, we have a lot of respect for each other, and we come at it. I come at it my way, he comes at it his way, and I've got like just so much respect for his
Oh,
attention to the detail of the craft.
I'm not saying I don't love him. I'm saying that as a person, like when I'm trying to figure out the person behind what the art is, I feel like it feels like there's flack thrown up. Like when a jet, this is an insane metaphor, but like when someone's firing rockets at a jet, I only know this through movies. But they throw something. The jet throws like flak behind it, and so that the missiles hit the flak instead of the jet. And I feel like sometimes there's like a mystifying effect in art where I'm like, I don't think I know the person that well. And then I'm like I'm very deeply like Death Cab for Cutie hits me really hard, but then I'm not sure I know Ben in a way where I maybe know you. Maybe I don't. I don't know.
No, I totally hear what you're saying. Well, there's a lot of magic involved, right? And it's sort of there's people who wear their hearts on their sleeves, and then there's people who reach into a vest with a sleeved shirt and they pull out a heart. And, a lot of different ways to do it.
Yeah. Anyway, Bob, I've taken up too much of your time. Thank you so much for joining me. This is an absolute honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and best of luck with the ongoing podcast and with your other creative endeavors.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.